A common question that's usually asked out of incredible frustration and anger and even resentment by the betrayed spouse is, when will I see remorse from my unfaithful spouse? It's been, you know, a few months, it's been maybe a year, maybe even longer. But betrayed spouses have this confusion typically early on of, they've just committed the greatest atrocity that could happen to our marriage, and there's not much sorrow, there's not much grief, there's not much pain in their eyes. Like, I'm not seeing much brokenness, contrition, sorrow. If you come from faith, godly sorrow for what they've done. When will I see that? The answer is, for most people, it's a very gradual thing. For most unfaithful spouses, it's a bit of an unfolding sorrow that will come to the degree that they get expert help. I can tell you from personal experience, early on, I was more numb and shocked that my affair had come out. I was completely in shock that it had finally come out after about 2.5 years. Then it came out, and still, I was wrapped around my own identity, what I had lost, my own pain. How do I fix this? How do I control this? There wasn't a ton of sorrow. There was a little bit, but even then it wasn't really genuine. I can look back now, 13 some odd years later, almost 14 years, and go, yeah, it wasn't very genuine at all. It was only after I got the right help that my real humility and sorrow and grief for what I had done to Samantha started to take shape. It's the same way for many unfaithful, because you have to understand, the unfaithful spouse has lived with such a justifying mindset for days, weeks, months, years, unfortunately for some decades. They've lied to themselves, they've justified it to themselves, they've made it okay with themselves first. So to think that they are just going to sober up after weeks and months, maybe years of dysfunctional justification and blame shifting is a bit ambitious. The reality is that when we cheat, we have to justify it to ourselves. We have to make it okay to ourselves. We have to blame you, the betrayed, for our affairs, at least for most of us. And so to think that we, upon discovery, are going to just find this gear, if you will, of sorrow, of humility, of brokenness, typically doesn't happen. Sometimes, for a small percentage of unfaithfuls on the front end, it will come out, and there will be a real heavy measure of genuine grief and sorrow that will be there and stay there for a long period of time and help launch them into recovery. But for a larger percentage, that is just simply not the case. Now, if you're betrayed, you may say, oh my gosh, does that mean because they weren't sorrowful on the front end that our recovery's doomed and the stats are stacked against us and that there's really not a lot of hope? No, not at all. I stand before you married 22 years, actually today. That's kind of unique, filming on your anniversary, right? But the show must go on. And being almost 14 years past D-Day, even though I wasn't very sorrowful, repentant, if you come from faith, broken, or showing much grief on the front end, that didn't mean that it didn't come. Let me tell you, it came like a freight train, but it came after I got the right kind of help. So if you're a betrayed spouse wondering, when is the grief, sorrow, humility, and real, river of brokenness going to come? It's going to come when they get expert help and when they put into practice that help and they commit to the process. Because to expect them to shift gears almost overnight or within the week or within a couple of weeks or even a month after they've been so built up in their own bitterness maybe and resentment towards you, it's just not likely. It takes time for the medicine to work. It takes time for the process to take shape. But if they get the right help, I assure you, that process will cause them to really see what they've done and how it's affected you and own what they've done to you. Part of the struggle for many of you might look like this. A few months in, Samantha sat with me and said, I don't see much hurt or pain or grief. And I was continually saying, well, you don't understand what I'm dealing with, and you don't understand my pain. And she said, well, tell me some of the things that you're struggling with. And so I did. I rattled off a lot of issues that I was dealing with because of my affair, right? I lost my job, lost my career. My name was completely just thrown out as all these different things. I was accused of a lot of things that I really did not do, but even what I did was bad enough, but I certainly did certainly did not do so many things that were said in the media and all of that. And I was able to kind of share all these things that I was experiencing, and it helped her to a certain extent, right? She was able to say, well, okay, you do have your own suffering that you're feeling. But even then, I wasn't completely at a point where I was able to really display the brokenness that I was feeling inside because I hadn't fully tapped into it. But as I committed to the process, it wasn't too far after that I was able to communicate in such a way. I was able to live in such a way where she was able to see, you know what? He is in pain. He is grieving. He is sorrowful. He is showing that he's getting the message of what he's done to me and to his life and to his kind of future, if you will, if he doesn't get back up and pursue recovery. So if you've done a pretty good measure of infidelity-specific help from an expert who's treated hundreds, maybe even thousands of cases, and it hasn't really helped, there may be a problem. You have to really ask yourself a few questions like, how long has it been? How committed to that help were they? Now, for some of you, you've done expert help, infidelity-specific help, committed to the process. It's been several months, almost a year, and there hasn't been much humility, brokenness, sorrow. We may have a problem, and you may not see much of that. It may reveal that they haven't taken very seriously the offense that they have created in their marriage. They may not have really done the work. They may have just been checking boxes, going through the motions. And at that point, that's a red flag. However, if they haven't had much infidelity-specific help, if they haven't really gotten expert care, if they haven't gotten to a safe place where they can start to hear things objectively from a third party that isn't you, it just may be that that sorrow that you want to see, that humility that you so desperately want to hear in their voice, hasn't really had adequate time to take shape, and it may be coming. I don't know. Every situation is radically different, but what I will tell you is, even when you get the best help, it does take a little bit of time. If they've gotten expert help, and it's been some time, and there still hasn't been much contrition, perhaps it's time to rethink what you're doing, and perhaps it's time to ask for more help. Or maybe it's just a healthy communication change where you start to ask each other some really, really deep questions on where you both are at emotionally. I can tell you, don't be alarmed if you haven't seen a lot of sorrow early on. It takes time. It takes work. We're very dysfunctional. We've built up layer upon layer of resentment and blame shifting in order to justify our affairs, and that doesn't go away overnight. But if you commit to the process and if you get the right help, it does go away. You do get healthier. You do, as an unfaithful spouse, find a great sense of sorrow, which leads to forgiving yourself, which leads to moving forward into a new life of humility and gratitude.